Would you say that part of the process in developing a disaster recovery plan or an incident response plan is being able to do a sort of deep dive into classifying your data and where it is, where it's located, who has access to it, and further the PHI or PII that might be contained and where it would be located to even understand and identify if a threat actor was in your system, what potential information was compromised. Do you see classification of data as being central to being able to make that determination and analysis?
Oh, absolutely.
We do. I'd say data classification is critical because that helps out Caroline with her job tremendously. And just because a threat actor gets in the system, they might have jumped onto a server that doesn't have any type of critical information, and that server might have been encrypted, while the sensitive information was on a different network or on a different subnet, and that data hasn't been encrypted. So kind of understanding your house, the order of your house is critical. And I will tell you, data classification is a time-intensive job. We store information tremendously in organizations, and we don't clean it up. It's so easy to dump stuff on a file share, on your hard drive, on email, and it just sits there. It takes a diligent person and a process for you to go through and start deleting information, because everyone's a hoarder. Everyone wants to keep everything. And if you look at it, especially lawyers will not delete anything. And they're just like, I'm going to use that file that I had back in 1975. Trust me, I'm going to use it. Are you really? So, you as an organization, you've got to ask yourself, can I get rid of it? Can I delete it? And if I can, let's move it off, because that's going to impact your data classification. If you're going through an acquisition due diligence process, one of the things that CRA does when we do due diligence job is we'll go through and look at the organization from their records retention policy. Are you actually using it? Do you have one? Have you classified the data? Do you know what you're holding? And can we get rid of it? I'll give you a case, one case example. We had a company that unfortunately had to go out and notify 40,000 individuals. The reason that is because they had their social security numbers on the payroll register, and they hired a lot of temporary workers. Well, they had made a data classification change about 5 years ago to stop putting the social security numbers on the payroll registers. However, when the threat actor got into the system, the information on there was beyond 5 years. So we had records going back 15 years. So even though you made that cutoff and you moved that sensitive data off of there, data classification said, no, we don't store that. But the problem was you didn't get rid of the old registers that actually had that classification. So it's a very time-intensive labor process, but it's something that I encourage all organizations to go through and do. Caroline, your thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, having that understanding not only just helps from your own perspective, right, from a company's perspective, but it also tells me what we're going to go up against. Because a lot of the times, on one of the first conversations that I have with people when an incident occurs is, what's my liability looking like? What am I up against, right? And to have an understanding as to what data that you do have and what data that you store is critical in that part of the analysis. Like, for instance, I know some people ask me in terms of, all right, I'm a financial institution, what are my obligations? Well, sometimes, depending on where you're at, you might have obligations in terms of notification to regulators within 72 hours. What about in the education industry? Same thing. In the event of a suspected incident, you have very quick turnaround times. But what if you're, of course, when you talk about healthcare organizations, okay, well, we know that we might be dealing with, Health and Human Services, with the Office of Civil Rights in terms of notification. But what if you have, and one of the questions that we do ask is that, do you have a business associate agreement with somebody? Do you fall under, where you might have an obligation to a covered entity to notify them right away? What if you hold data for others? There are certain states out there that state that you need to tell the data owner right away that in the event of an incident that their data may be at issue. So those are all pieces in critical thinking in terms of where you need to be in terms of your data. And one of the things that Bill had mentioned earlier in terms of holds is that in the event of an incident, it is absolutely critical to put what's called a litigation hold, which basically is preserving any and all evidence at the moment the incident occurs going forward. And that includes emails, any sort of relevant evidence, or any sort of artifacts going forward, to put, number one, from a forensic standpoint, in the best position, but also you never want to be challenged by someone else saying, like, hey, look, you deleted that data, you knew about it and you deleted it. You never want to put yourself in that position. All the more important to have an understanding as to who needs to do that, and that should be in your incident response plan from moment one.
Lots of good stuff to think about. And I think, everybody listening probably is thinking to themselves, I have a long checklist of items to make sure I have shored up. So I think that's good advice. Margaux, turning to you, when you start to talk about, organizations who do all this work, create these written policies and procedures, making sure and the importance of marrying that to the terms of some policy conditions. I know there's some sticky conditions and some policies that talk about wire transfer and how that's effectuated within an organization. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of working with your broker to make sure that your internal organization's policies will match the coverage afforded by the cyber program?
Sure. So your cyber insurance broker or your risk management consultant, it's their job to really know the coverage inside and out so that you as an organization can focus on operating your business, meaning making sure that the policy that is being placed for you might have certain terms or conditions regarding, do you have to verify with the callback, or do you need to get authorization from somebody else in your organization, and to think about those things so that the policies that you have in place for your organization match up to what your coverage is doing, so that in the event of a possible incident, you can ensure that most of what your coverage is looking for can truly apply. So think about, who has access to wiring the funds? Is it anyone in the accounting department, anyone of executive leadership? How frequently are you wiring funds? Thinking about, is this a weekly occurrence, a daily occurrence, multiple times a day? So thinking about those things helps to understand the process to have in place, but also how much are you wiring? Because these wire transfers go out and the money is gone so quickly, the carriers are not really providing these large limits of $1 million, $5 million of coverage, but rather sublimating it to typically something in the hundreds of thousands. And with that, understanding, well, if your organization is wiring $1 million at a time based on certain invoices or contracts, what would that look like if there was a fraudulent invoice? So thinking about that is really important. And then I think also thinking about on the cyber side as well, a lot of the times the policies say you must work with an approved incident response vendor. And the goal for that is to make sure that experienced firms are being involved in your incident response process rather than those you might have relationships with outside, but might not specialize in it. So thinking about who does your carrier work with, and they're typically organizations just like Bill and Carolyn's here, so that they can jump right in. They know how to comply with the policy, but they also know how to maximize that coverage for you.
That's an excellent point. And one of the things we've talked to Carolyn and Bill about in the past is not waiting until the uh-oh moment at 4 o'clock on a Friday. You really want to call Carolyn and Bill to run through all of these items, to shore up your checklist, test your systems, test your plans, and have in place a negotiated engagement material. And then that way, if and when an incident occurs, you can have all of those people lined up, outlined in your incident response plan, and you can execute the agreement and sort of hit the ground running, as opposed to wasting, hours at the critical phases of an incident negotiating terms of an agreement. So I think that's a really great point.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the content, you can click through to the next video right here. Also, if you'd like to stay up to date on more videos like this, like, subscribe, and follow.